Welcome to Green Time. I'm Don Fitz, hosting the show. With me I have Zaki Baruti with the Universal African Peoples Organization. We're going to be talking about more Black Lives Lost. We're doing a series of shows about violence by police and vigilantes against the black community, because we believe that part of environmental work is looking at the environment that people have to live in. Now, Zaki, in a previous show, we covered a lot of issues, a lot of examples of young black people being killed in St. Louis. We covered Marilyn Banks, Garland Carter, Gary Ball, and of course, Michael Brown. Now, nationally, there have been some cases that people probably will remember when we mention, but just to remind people of what's been happening. What happened with Trayvon Martin? That was in 2012.
Well, this was a case where you had police vigilanteism involved, in which a so-called vigilante in the community, in which Trayvon was staying with his father, and Trayvon had went in the evening hours to a nearby convenience store to pick up some Skittles and something to drink, and then on the way back,
George Zimmerman.
Took it upon himself to stereotype him as a young black youth who was wearing a hoodie as if he may have been a criminal, and called into the police department and said there was a suspicious person, and the dispatcher asked him not to, and George was talking about he don't be following him, and et cetera, and they asked him not to, but he went ahead anyway. And to that end, there was a fatal encounter in which Zimmerman ended up shooting Trayvon Martin. And by the way, Trayvon was on the phone with one of his friends, a lady friend, and was sharing with her that he felt very uncomfortable with Zimmerman following him, and obviously that led to the incident in which Trayvon was killed, and no justice came out of that, where you see again Black lives doesn't matter from a judicial system that did not include anybody black on it, which found George Zimmerman.
He was indicted, but then he was not found guilty.
Right.
And like you said, this is a case where it's not police violence, it's a neighborhood watchman. It's basically vigilante violence.
Right, absolutely.
Okay. Now another case right after the killing of Michael Brown in 2014, in July, the very next month, Eric Garner was killed in Staten Island, New York.
Absolutely, and that's the shame of it. Here is a father. He was the father of children who was trying to make a living by selling, I think, individual cigarettes, which was
not exactly a huge form of larceny, or not something that would threaten people.
Right, and for the police to apply the kind of force which the world has seen, where 6, 7 police officers had surrounded and taken him down to the concrete, and it was obvious that he was in pain because he kept saying, I can't breathe. Yet, without any sensitivity, they continued to chokehold the officer, especially, which led to his death.
It was an illegal chokehold, wasn't it?
Right.
So something by guidelines say you should not do this.
But again, nothing came of that, and of course you had the eruptions there. So again, that's another example of many times officers commit heinous crimes against our people, and nothing's been done.
And of course, the one factor which outraged people was that there were cameras operating it. It's not like nobody had a video of it. People had a video of it being shown, and it was for a crime which, I mean, if you and I were enforcing the law, when somebody saw somebody selling individual cigarettes, we might say, well, you probably shouldn't do that.
Right,
because it's such a minor infraction of the law.
Right, and it kind of reminds, when we everybody's seeing the videos, old adage coming out of Rodney King, for as the black community, don't believe your lying eyes. In terms of the decision coming forth from the judicial system, the grand jury system, which is many times being corrupted by prosecutors who, of course, have relationships with the police officers.
Now, just about the same time, Right after the Michael Brown shooting was Eric Garner, and then right after the Eric Garner strangulation was the shooting of Tamir Rice in Cleveland, Ohio. What happened there?
That's another mad situation where a young African youth, about 12 years old,
Yeah,
if
12
my
years.
memory serves me right, who was playing with a toy weapon, and someone who had observed it called in the police and shared with the dispatcher that it may probably be a toy gun. Yet the officers, upon arrival, within less than a minute, they were shooting the youth and shot and killed them. Shot him multiple times, in fact. So again, it speaks to every black person. Many blacks are looked upon by officers, predominantly white officers, as criminals right away in terms of mentality. And it is
even a 12-year-old boy.
Even 12 years old. Which also is not just 12 years old. You brought up another case that I must cite that happened in New York. A elderly young lady named Eleanor, not a young lady, but elderly sister, I think around 70 years old, named Eleanor Bumpers, had a knife, and about 3 or 4 officers were responding to a call to her home and shot her with a shotgun, not able to disarm them. Whereas on the other hand, there was a case somewhere in this country where 2 black officers was dealing with a white male who was wielding a gun, but he ended up being brought in without being killed.
Yes.
So that speaks to the attitude that black lives don't matter.
Absolutely.
From the people who's supposed to serve and protect.
Okay. Now, the case of Freddie Gray happened in April 2015. Could you tell us a little? And that was in Baltimore.
That's the most recent cause of great eruption and disturbances in America, in Baltimore, and some of the demonstrations are spreading elsewhere. Here was another youth who had been stopped for seemingly no really worthwhile purpose. Supposedly, officers saw that he had a knife on the buckle of his pants or something to that effect, and they chased after him. He ran for whatever reason. They caught up with him, handcuffed him. In the meantime, as it been video, he was in extreme pain, put into the police van, and somehow come out with a broken back.
I think 80% of the spinal cord was severed.
Right. So
and he wasn't in the hospital for a week, in agony in the hospital before he died on April the 19th.
And there's many people in our community, like in Baltimore. There's a thing called nickeling, I think, where
nickel ride, right?
Nickel ride, where once placed in the van, the officers speed along the highways or the streets and suddenly stop because they're not.
And you're handcuffed, and there's nothing really to grab onto, so your head just gets thrown around.
Right. So those are some of the the traumatic ways to brutalize our people that many folks in the community knows occurs, which also lead to what I say is the rebellions that's taking place in Baltimore as opposed to riots.
Okay, we're going to take a break and take a look at a short movie by Washington University medical students. This was made about a week after the news came out that Darren Wilson was not going to be indicted for killing Michael Brown. And we will be back in just a few minutes.
Today we are showing solidarity with med students across the nation, and we are demonstrating our discontent with the status quo. Thank you everybody for coming. We're gonna hear a few words from Miriam.
Hello, Washington University students. Sorry, this is as loud as it goes. Today we are standing in solidarity with thousands of health professional students across the country, and in solidarity with the protesters who are out on the streets combating racial violence and police brutality for all of us. Today, we wear our white coats, a gift that was given to us on the first day of our education, something that gives us a unique ability. We have the ability to see all of society, all that is good and all that is bad. We see all of the injustice and all of the pain and all of the hatred that impacts our patients' lives and their health. And our white coats can act as a tool in one of two ways. They can be a shield to hide our eyes from these atrocities and protect our privilege. Or they can be a sword to break down these disparities and help move us all towards equality. Today, thousands of medical students are gathering in halls just like this to show that we support the latter, that the healthcare professions can and must stand for equality, that the healthcare professions can and must stand for justice, that the healthcare professions can and must stand for human life because Black lives matter. Medical students and health professional students across the country are letting the nation know that we can't breathe. We can't breathe because every 28 hours, a Black man is killed by a police officer. We can't breathe because every year, prison expansion decisions are based off the standardized test scores of third-grade Black boys, meaning that in America, it is more valuable to invest in their potential incarceration than it is to invest in Black education. Yes. We can't breathe because our white coats are heavy. They are weighed down by the burden of our past and our present. Medicine is built on a foundation of exclusion and exploitation. Exclusion of women and people of color from the practice of medicine. And exploitation of Black bodies in research studies. At our present, racial violence is a public health crisis. Unconscious bias is a public health crisis. Today, in institutions just like ours across the country, Black pain is not treated equally to white pain. Black cancer is not screened for as thoroughly as white cancer. Black diabetes is not treated as rigorously as white diabetes, leading to more eye disease, more renal failure, and more amputations for our Black patients. Medical injustices are innumerable. We have inherited a system that is broken, but we are poised to change it. And my fellow students, we cannot stand for this any longer. And so today, with medical students across the country, we will not stand. We will soon take our place on the floor next to our other health professional students and in solidarity with the health professional students across the country to show that we are calling for the end of racial bias. We will take our place on the floor to show that we will not forget our past and we will be cognizant of our present. We will recall past injustices and we will continue to call out current injustices so that no one's pain goes silent. And we will take our place on the floor to show that we will be introspective. We will determine what our unconscious biases are, and we will figure out how they may impact our interactions with each other and our patients so that we can finally practice just medicine.
Welcome back to Green Time. I'm Don Fitz, and with me I have Zaki Baruti with Universal African Peoples Organization, and we are talking about more Black lives lost, the string of killings of young Blacks, usually young, sometimes older Black people, but especially young Black men by police and sometimes by vigilantes. One of the things that we've mentioned before, Zaki, in a previous show, was that if there's no, when we're talking about preventing this from happening, that if there's no consequences for people who whites who kill young Black men, then it's going to keep on happening. And so the first thing, it's not just the killings, but it's also the disrespect that police often show when they're stopping Black people, when they're doing drug searches, just assuming that somebody who's Black has drugs. In other words, it's a whole disrespect that runs through the whole relationships of police to the Black community.
Absolutely, and a clear example that about 14 years ago, the Missouri General Assembly mandated that the state attorney conduct a study as to whether or not Black people are disproportionately stopped on the highways and the streets of the state of Missouri. Every year it comes back that black people are disproportionately stopped, yet there are no policies put into place to punish those municipalities that practice that. So again, without any kind of punishment for those officers who commit acts of brutality and murder, then this whole culture will continue, and we'll continue getting what we have, the kinds of reactions that occur from the communities that's impacted, the black communities, in reaction to these killings and the brutalities.
Okay, one of the issues which I think there's a real important racial difference in perception is the whole concept of police stops for traffic offenses, where a huge number of black people are stopped in a lot of municipalities around St. Louis. And for a lot of white people who look at that, they think, well, I'm not stopped. I don't see any problem. If I do get stopped, I might have been doing 40 and a 30, so I should have gotten the ticket. And for black people, it might have a really serious effect when people are stopped for a minor infraction.
Absolutely, on two levels. First of all, the ticketing, as I just said, that black people are disproportionately stopped on the highways. So a lot of times with these tickets it place kind of like an economic burden on black people because of the economic injustice that takes place in terms of the median income of a black family is much lower than that of a white family.
It's not just income, but black families do make less money, but what's even a wider gap is resources. The typical black family, I think, has 1/20th of the wealth available of the typical white family. So anybody who doesn't have very much available money, for you to get slapped with a $300 ticket.
And then you're not able to pay it, and then warrants are placed on you, and then you're further in debt in terms of once you picked up from a warrant and you placed on bond. So it's an ever-ending cycle where, again, out of the Department of Justice report, which says, found that Ferguson city government decided it was really a criminal enterprise to target black motorists. And again, that's just reflective of the overall culture all across the state of Missouri. But I think the key going past just the ticketing is how do we solve some of the problems? I've always maintained that, first of all, the police forces that work a community ought to reflect the ethnicity of that community.
Why is that important? Because, I mean, a lot of people will say, a lot of whites will say, listen, there's black on black crime all the time. So you have a lot of cops who are black, that's not going to solve anything.
It will solve anything. Solve a lot of things. First of all, you seldom, and that's not to say it does not occur, you do not get the frequency of these highly publicized killings and what have you, where you have a black officer shooting or killing a black a person of the community.
And so even if a black officer talks rough to people and yells at somebody, it's very, very rare that you see a black person getting out of a car running away and a black officer pulls out a gun and kills the person as he's running away.
And then too, in terms of if it was reversed, I'm sure the white community, if there was, say the example of Ferguson, or say Ladue,
right?
In Ladue, wherever is that force, it was a reverse like in Ferguson. Instead of the majority of the police officers being white in Ladue, which is reflective of the white community Ladue, and like in Ferguson, you had 68% of the population being black, but the police force was 68% white. So if it was reversed in Ladue, where you had a vast majority of black officers, I'm sure the Ladue community would be up in outrage.
Well, especially if one of those black officers shot somebody for jaywalking down the street, which I think was the reason that Michael Brown was killed.
And constantly targeting the white motorists. So to solve the problem, what we need to have is a principled position that the communities are to be patrolled and policed by the people who make up that community. And that also solves not only in terms of the relationship with people, but also creates an economic base too.
Of course, there's jobs there.
There's jobs, absolutely. So that's one issue. The second issue is that whether black or white, each for the different communities, the officers are to live within the community in which they work. Right now in St. Louis, after a period of time, a police officer can move outside of the St. Louis community. I would kindly suggest if we looked at where many of the officers who work in Ferguson you know, where they live. I'm sure probably majority live outside the community. So if an officer living within the community, that's greater interaction between the officer and members of that particular community. Another thing that needs to occur.
One thing I just want to say there that I think would be important is if a white person never interacts with black people, except when he's got a uniform on, and you see kids doing something, by kids I mean people up, to about 20, doing something that they shouldn't be doing. Well, you don't know how to talk to them to tell them to stop doing it. And so the first thing that a white officer might do is to go to the gun.
Right, and that's the problem because of the cultural differences that occur. But another key component is the need for the implementation of effective civilian oversight boards that would have subpoena power. Why is that important? Too many times the police are allowed to investigate themselves. And in allowing them to investigate themselves, many times there's no impetus to charge or find the wrongs of those officers who's been accused of wrongdoing. So with an effective civilian review board, you have an independent agency that look into the allegations of police abuse, be it verbally, be it physical, or be it at the ultimate the taking of a life. And another thing I think...
Now, subpoena power means the board would have the ability to tell people that they have to come and testify.
Right, absolutely.
And they would be able to call up officers and say, did you witness this?
Right.
And you have to testify if you saw what happened.
And it's irony that the St. Louis Board of Aldermen just recently passed a civilian oversight board for the city of St. Louis, but without subpoena power. Even in this weakened form, that the police association, the St. Louis Police Association, is fighting against this form of civilian oversight board. That ought to tell the public something, that these officers do not want to for the light to be shone on them because they're acting like some dirty, for lack of a better word, dirty rats. When the light shine, they scuttle about. So that's what, in my humble opinion, those are some of the immediate things that need to occur so that we can begin to kind of solve some of the real abuse of our people.
Okay, we're going to take a break, and we will be back in just a minute for a wrap-up of the show. Okay. Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. With me, I have Zaki Baruti with Universal African Peoples Organization, and we're just talking about more Black lives lost, about the large number of Black people who have been killed by police or vigilantes during the last several decades in the United States. We were just talking about a civilian oversight board. One thing which has really impressed me about the opposition to a civilian oversight board is that my entire working life I've been working either in the mental health field or as a teacher. And there's always some people who in mental health are teaching who are abusive towards students or abusive towards clients. And so there is always the ability for some outside group to investigate. It's not purely self-investigation. And to me, it strengthens these professions. It seems to me that the police force is the only one that really, where you have a profession where people do not want anybody outside to investigate. And I think that's something that raises a lot of suspicions.
Absolutely. And so too many times the police are put into the position of being judge, jury, and executioner. And with an effective civilian oversight of that, that begins to lessen in terms of their attitude. So again, what I want to do, though, Don, is just reemphasize how I see as some critical solutions going forward. The first solution, as far as police violence and the interaction with the Black community, first and foremost, I want to maintain the position that all police forces in all the communities across America are to reflect the ethnicity of the community in which the officers work. Again, an example in Ferguson, which was abnormal, where you had a community of 68% Black, yet you had a police force.
We only got a few seconds left.
Oh, okay. So along with the police reflecting the community, there ought to be an effective civilian oversight board and the people living in the community.
Zaki, I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody for viewing Green Time and hope to see you same time next week.